Hey nonprofit leaders, I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host of Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, the show for people running nonprofits who'd rather work smarter than harder with abundance, excellence, and courage. Before we dive in, I want to invite you to join our newsletter where every week you'll get actionable tips, inspiring resources, and updates on new episodes. You can grab it at inspirednonprofitleadership.com. And a big thank you to our sponsor, DonorBox, who has mastered the art and science of removing the friction from donation forms. And you know we love a good process at Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Okay, let's dive in. My guest for this episode is Jocelyn Wyatt, who is a powerhouse of a nonprofit CEO. Currently, she is the CEO of Alight and leads a global team of over 2,000 members, leveraging her extensive strategic development expertise and a strong human-centered approach. I love that Jocelyn's profile on LinkedIn lists her as a humanitarian leader. I wish that was on my LinkedIn. Maybe I'll put it there, but that really resonates. Jocelyn's also the co-founder and former CEO of IDEO.org. We'll talk a little bit about that, where she drove collaborations with major global entities, names you recognize, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the big names, acumen, and fostering a decade of impactful leadership. Welcome, Jocelyn. Before we dive into nonprofit leadership-y things, would you just tell us a little more about yourself personally, round yourself out as a whole human for us?
Of course. It's so great to be here, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me. I was born in Vermont to parents that were both involved in education and ended up growing up in small towns in Massachusetts and Wisconsin. And one of the things that I think was unique about my family was that we were always hosting international students. And so I had sort of had this exposure to the world and to a global community from a really young age. So I went to college and studied anthropology, again, just really curious about different cultures in the world. And when I was graduating, I told my advisor that I wanted to do good in the world and I wanted to be able to travel internationally. And so he directed me to global development. And really, I've had a really full career working in that space. So I initially started working for a USAID contractor in Washington, D.C., and then that led me to study international business and get an MBA, which then introduced me to social enterprise. And I had the opportunity to live and work with social enterprises in India and in Kenya as an Acumen Fellow. And then that led me to meet folks at IDEO and to learn about human-centered design. And I'd always sort of been trying to figure out how do we do development work in a way that is much more community-oriented, that is much more about sort of uplifting and centering on the expertise of the people with lived experience, rather than these sort of top-down decision-making and program design that I was so used to seeing when I was working in DC and other places. And so got really interested in social innovation and human-centered design and ended up, as you mentioned, co-founding IDEO.org, which I ran for about 10 years. For basically the whole time that I was at IDEO and IDEO.org, I had the opportunity to work with American Refugee Committee, which is now Alight. They were just a great partner and client of ours for many years, and I felt like they were really the INGO that I had the opportunity to work with at IDEO.org that really sort of represented what I believed in, which was really being customer-centric to the people that we were serving and really being willing to sort of take risks and be innovative and try new things. And so when I had the opportunity to join Alight as CEO about 5 years ago, I was really excited to do so and stepped into that role in 2021 and have been leading Alight since then.
What a rich history. Sometimes I meet new people through the podcast. I'm like, I have a feeling I'm going to like this person, but I don't know why. I mean, I like everybody, but so many things there just resonated with me from I love Vermont. I grew up going to summer camp in Vermont. About to go there in a couple days to pick up my son, who's now going to the same summer camp.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I studied international studies and the time
Okay.
of globalization. And when college, I was like, let me go to all the hard places as study abroad. And I went to Tanzania. And as it turns out, today, like my teeny team are all, they're 2 Kenyan women who are just like amazing powerhouses and do amazing work for me there. So I feel it's nice to have that little connection. And I love this global world we live in where like
Yeah.
I just have this small team, we have this close relationship, and yet, you know, there's my good friend and teammate in Kenya and I'm here in upstate New York, and
Yeah.
we're just trying to make a difference in the world and make good families futures for our children at the same time.
Absolutely. I totally hear you. I live in a small town in West Virginia now, in Elkins, West Virginia. So I totally get that.
Yeah, so amazing. So, and to get to know you even a little better and practice asking my favorite new fundraising question that I recently learned, it's on another podcast episode. Folks can go check it out. What was your favorite childhood toy?
Oh, that's a good question. I have always been someone, my birth sign is I'm a Cancer, and I have always grown up around water and lakes and occasionally the beach, but I loved sandcastle building toys. I would say those were my favorite. I loved nothing more than to go, and this would be one thing that I would do with my younger brothers. There was a place that we would go camping every year at Lake Dunmore, the Branbury State Park in Vermont, and they would have a sandcastle building competition for the campers that stayed at that campground. And so we would enter that and build these like amazing structures and spend like all day on it. And yeah, I just loved the like plastic sandcastle building molds that would allow you to make those great constructions.
Amazing. I'm so excited about this new. I'm a collector of questions, great questions.
That's a good one.
It's such a good one. It reveals so much about folks, and I'm just using it to get to know people. And it's really fun. So let me shift gears now into big, out of, sandcastles of the world, if you will. You have had a view, you have a view of what's going on in the nonprofit space. Do you feel, the whole world is getting disrupted by AI and all sorts of things, but what do you feel like, is there disruption in the nonprofit space, and what is happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak more specifically within the humanitarian field, which is that, this actually the disruption preceded the US government cuts of 2025, when, over the last several years, a number of European governments, big donors to humanitarian aid, started reducing the amount of foreign aid that their governments were contributing to UN agencies and to the bilaterals and multilaterals. And so we started to see funding decrease prior to 2025, but then certainly the foreign aid cuts of January of 2025 really hit us and our industry really hard. And I think we're continuing, more than 18 months later, we're continuing to sort of see the ripple effects from that. So we're seeing, there's not the sort of USAID, it no longer exists. The State Department is operating in very different ways with a significantly reduced budget and staffing, and then UN agencies are just not receiving the level of funding that they had before, both because of contributions from the US government, but also contributions from foreign governments as well. And so, as a result, the work that we do is focused on working with refugees and forcibly displaced communities. So many of those folks are really dependent on that aid. They are effectively sort of corralled into living in camps for refugees or settlements for internally displaced people. They, oftentimes they don't have a lot of freedom of movement or many alternatives because of they're not able to legally work or rent places to live or buy property in the countries that they have fled to. Or, because in a place like Sudan, because of war and conflict, like certain places are safe for them to stay and others they'd really be putting the safety of their family at risk. And so, people are dependent on that aid, whether it's the health clinics or the schools there or the cash transfers or the food rations. And with that funding being cut really significantly, there's just fewer resources and increasing needs. So at the same time that we're seeing a real decrease in that humanitarian aid, we're also seeing more and more people around the world that have experienced forcible displacement. So we now have close to 130 million people that have experienced forcible displacement due to conflict or natural disaster or severe social or economic exclusion. And so things are just really stretched, I would say. And so, yeah, I think we're in a place where, government funding has declined. There is philanthropy and philanthropic funding, but it certainly can't make up those holes. And so I think what that's meant is that humanitarian organizations like ours are really having to think about, like, how do we do things differently, right? And so some of that is about, like, how do we operate more efficiently? How are we more cost effective? And that's certainly a piece of it. But I think the other piece of it is, like, how do we actually solve some of these problems? So how do we really help transition people out of this, what should be a temporary state of displacement, into a place where they can really provide for themselves and their families and live, without needing that type of foreign aid support.
Yeah. Any exciting solutions or things that you've experimented with, even if they didn't work? What kinds of, it's so true. Like when things are condensed, unfortunately, but sometimes it's a moment of generation, creativity. So what's bubbling up?
Yeah. I think a couple examples. One is a social enterprise that we've been running for a few years now in Uganda called Safe Rides. And this has basically been an opportunity to help entrepreneurial men and women in a refugee camp in Nakivale in Uganda to be able to start businesses to do sort of boda taxis within the refugee camp context. So if you folks that have spent time in Uganda, you've seen sort of the motorcycle taxis are very common there, but they weren't necessarily as prevalent within the context of the refugee camp. And so we were able to basically identify and find entrepreneurs that wanted to start these taxi businesses, provide them with loans to be able to purchase those bodas, provide them with sort of the tools and support to create those businesses, build a brand with them to be able to make sure that they were sort of known and recognized as credible taxi drivers within the community. And they've really been thriving, and we've been able to recycle that capital and to be able to reinvest in other drivers and other businesses. And so it both provides sort of mobility for folks within Nakivale, but also provides real opportunities for income generation for the entrepreneurs who are running those businesses. And then just a second example, in Rwanda, we've been running a coding school for a number of years. In the face of AI, obviously needs around coding are somewhat different, but there still continues to be real opportunities to teach people sort of digital literacy skills, build curiosity, help them use AI tools to build solutions. But what we're building now, we received a donation to create a facility that we're calling Future Ground in Rwanda in the context of a refugee camp. And so there we're basically working now to sort of do a co-creation process to determine what is the curriculum to teach young people, both refugees as well as host community members, really build sort of job-ready skills and training, connect with employers, understand what it is that they need from a workforce, and then do that training for young people, and then connect them with employers and provide them with the support that they need to be able to relocate out of the Mahama refugee camp to, Kigali or wherever in Rwanda it is that these job opportunities exist. So I think those are a couple examples of where, again, we're sort of finding people within the context of a refugee camp who want to be able to provide for themselves and their families, and then just giving, small opportunities and exposing them to opportunities that allow them to then be able to make money for themselves and be able to transition to a place of real independence.
Yeah. I love those examples, and I think they're so powerful in that sometimes we tend to overcomplicate solutions, right? And sometimes the simple solutions, are the most effective or can be highly effective. It doesn't really matter if they're on the spectrum of effective, just that they are effective.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I hear you saying in these examples is really living with working with what's already working rather than imposing something new and different, and just kind of going back to that humanitarian leadership concept. Can you talk a little bit about what it means to design with people, to have leadership with people, as opposed to that more traditional model of like, this is what we're bringing to you and we will save you.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, so one of the things that I would say when I came to Alight, this was already underway, but we have pushed it even further in the past 5 years, which is really a model of distributed proximate leadership. And so the way that we've organized the organization is that we have executive directors that oversee, one or sometimes multiple countries. And those executive directors are really the ones that are setting the strategy for that team. They are raising the majority of the funding to be able to deliver on that strategy. They are, hiring and structuring their own teams, and they're delivering on that work. And we really, truly believe that those executive directors, because they are from those places and they are living and working there, that they are the best suited to make decisions about what these, whether it's a new social enterprise or a new program or a new service model, they're the best place to be able to sort of make decisions about what those are. And so I think what that distributed leadership has meant is that, the way that we've structured our folks, my role, my team, our marketing engagement team, our sort of global team that sits across the US, and we have a hub in Kenya and other folks around the world. But the global team in Alight is really in support of those enterprises. So we are, when they say we want to take on this initiative of Safe Rides or Future Ground or whatever it is, we say, great, let's do that with you. And we will help you raise resources and find, funders to support that. And we will bring you support, we will help contribute to those efforts. And so I think we've, instead of sort of us, saying, and we intentionally don't use words like headquarters, we talk about our hubs or our global team. But I think so much of the orientation that we have has sort of flipped those power dynamics and put that power and real sort of authority in the hands of the enterprise executive directors, as opposed to the hands of the sort of centralized headquarters or global team.
Yeah. I love that you use the word distributed leadership. It's one of my favorite concepts. There's a saying, I don't know who said it, but business moves at the speed of decisions, and one person can only make so many good decisions in a day. And so distributing decision making among people just makes so much sense to me. And then especially, you quickly go to, well, who should get what decisions? And I tend to default to whoever has the most skin in the game, which, really aligns with, right? The people who are not only there and know the information, but when they make a bad decision, they will personally suffer as a result. And when they make a good decision, they'll personally feel the reward of having that. It's like a direct correlation. I'm wondering, because what I've learned over the years, right, when we talk about distributing decision making and distributed leadership, it's a special kind of delegation. But when we're delegating tasks, we're kind of it's still hierarchical. We're assigning things, and to delegate leadership and decision making is kind of another beast. What are some lessons that you've learned that either worked really well or didn't work when it came to delegating this kind of leadership, ensuring that the people you're delegating it to are taking the accountability that you would like them to? What have you learned? Just some tips for us.
Yeah, so when I first joined Alight, we embarked on a strategy process within the first few months, and one of the central tenets of our strategy was really focused on co-creation. And so basically what we were saying was that, and a focus in particular with co-creation with customers, and we kept sort of using this refrain of co-creation with customers. And I think I just sort of assumed at the beginning that because an executive director was, from Sudan and living in Sudan, that they would necessarily be doing co-creation themselves and connecting with people sort of at all levels, at the level of our customers directly. And as I went to spend time with them, some of them were, absolutely. It was, something that was sort of part of what their leadership practice was, but others weren't. And that was because that wasn't the leadership style that they had been taught or sort of knew about. And so I think what I recognized was that I both could hold distributed leadership, but then also had to teach distributed leadership to sort of the next level and the next level and the next level. And that co-creation wasn't necessarily something that was going to just happen organically or innately, or because we were using that terminology. Like, we actually had to train people in the principles of that. And so one of our efforts was really to run a series of co-creation workshops, both in person around the world as well as virtually in some cases, so that we could get our executive directors and our directors of programs and our regional directors and our, health advisors and everyone else to learn how to have conversations with customers, how to engage with customers, and then how to bring those, how to synthesize those insights and bring them back, and how to allow that to really inform programmatic decisions. And so I think that's been sort of a big learning, and I think it's something that we've done pretty effectively, but like really making sure that it goes beyond just sort of saying those words and then expecting that it goes through all levels of the organization, instead of saying like, yeah, we need to start this at the top, but then like we also need to sort of continue to allow it to flow through, so that it's not just then you have an executive director that's then sitting in the capital city there making all the decisions without that customer engagement. That doesn't actually like represent the sort of strategy or the values that we're trying to pursue.
Yeah. I love that example. I think it's so real, and because it's a topic I don't think gets enough attention, I have found in teaching this to clients who are mostly CEOs and they're needing to teach it to their staff, that it feels foreign at first, and then they start to realize that this is actually the way humans kind of like naturally do things, and then they get schoolified and learn this like very hierarchical way. But like, I almost think like if you look back at like little kids before they've been, through too much school, they're very much they're pretty bold about just asking, people what's your favorite color? What do you like to eat? They get to know the people around them, and do you want to be my best friend? Right. And then and if they don't like something, well, that's not fair. And this idea of like, no, I shouldn't say something, or I should say something, like that all comes later. And at some points I've thought, how do I teach this concept of distributed leadership and things around co-creation better? Of like, it's almost like we just need to like unlearn some of the hierarchical school learning, and then the learning of like how to do co-creation, I feel like, is easier than the unlearning. I'm just wondering what your take is on that. If you agree, disagree, but like, I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah.
Yeah. It's interesting, when we first started, we were using this sort of construct of human-centered design, which sort of is like a linear, it can be seen as like a linear process, and there's all these steps to it, and it takes a long time. And when I came to Alight, we actually intentionally started using the phrase co-creation instead of human-centered design. And now we've actually, like, that too seemed too kind of like programmatic in a sense, which was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do co-creation if I'm designing a new program. But people weren't necessarily doing it if they were designing a new internal process, right? Or a new internal tool. Yeah. And so then now this year we've started just using the terms proximity and agency, which are like, at any time that you can, default to people that are like the decision making of people that are more proximate to the problem. Always try and find the next level of proximity, right? And always give agency to those that have less of a voice, or those that do hold that proximity. And so I think we've tried to make it seem more accessible as just like a mindset as opposed to like a methodology. Yeah. I think it's both. And at IDEO.org, we definitely talked about methods and mindsets with the human-centered design toolkit that we developed. But I think that's been helpful. And then I think the other piece of it too is that we have hubs in Minneapolis and Nairobi at Alight. And our hubs are really meant to be, we call them co-creation hubs, and they're really meant to be places where we invite in customers and, staff of sort of all levels, and board members and donors. And they're places where we come together for conversations and community teas. And we call them community teas, right? And we don't make a big deal about like, this isn't a co-creation necessarily. It's just about conversation, right? This is an opportunity to meet other people and to have conversations with other people. And so, often people are, they'll be shy or they'll hold back. And so you can't just sort of invite them into the space and let it go and have it all, have everybody intermingle and talk to other people. That often doesn't happen. But like, we can find ways to make it happen easily by, putting prompts on name tags or putting people into conversation circles. and really asking people to ask each other questions on a more personal level. That sounds like some of the questions you've been collecting, those
I'm
types
going
of
to
things.
ask you now, what are your favorite questions that you've learned to ask to get people to spill the tea?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a lot of like the example the one that you asked me at the beginning, I think is a great one. But like, yeah, it can be anything from like, what is a highlight from your summer, to like when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up, to, think about a time when one of the questions we've been asking people recently is like, tell us a story about a time when you saw someone fall in love with learning something new. Right. And it's just like, it's a great one to hear people talk about like times when they've been teachers or parents, or when they've like shown someone something new that they've gotten really excited about. So, yeah, I think for me, it's less about like, you shouldn't be doing things in this way, or kind of the like, and more that like people love connecting with other people. Like it's just part of who we are as humans, I believe. And so when we give people the opportunities to do that, they want more of that. They want more of that experience. And so I think in some cases it's less about like telling people how to do it differently, and more about just showing them a new way, or giving them experiences that allow them to just kind of step into that, or it happens to them.
Yeah, I think you really said that so well, to this idea I've been thinking about, like that it's not just a mindset, but it is a little more of a mindset. And it's a little like, if we just give people the opportunity to kind of like be the way they enjoy being most, connecting with people and engaging in that way, there's a lot of good stuff that emerges. That, we need some structure to create those environments, but it's not like we're just going to impose new structure and then like it's not that complex. It's not really that complicated. We're just going to let
Yeah,
people be themselves and actually make good
exactly.
stuff
Just be human. Yeah.
happen. Love that. So as we wrap up, I'd love to know, what's one lesson from your leadership journey that you hope nonprofits carry with them?
I mean, I think I've shared a few, but I think I would probably say curiosity. I think that curiosity is such an important sort of trait to hold, particularly as a leader. Like, I think we so often, as we sort of go up a journey in leadership, are like told that we're the experts, that we know all the things, and people ask us all the questions, and we have the answers. And I think particularly, whether we're working within our own communities, in our own context, or we're working in other communities, I just think it's really important to show up with curiosity and an open mind to like ask questions and really deeply listen. And really, I think one of the things that I learned a lot from working with designers is that like asking questions, like asking good questions, and like asking many levels of questions, sort of deeper and deeper, can really get you to a level of insight and understanding that you wouldn't otherwise have. And that we so often sort of proceed through the world making assumptions that we understand things or know about things. And I think what design can teach us and is that, like, yes, I may see that watering can and think about it, the purpose for this, but like if I ask somebody else, like, oh, what do you use that object for? Like it may be for something completely different than the purpose that I was sort of initially holding. And then that can teach me something that I never would have learned had I not sort of started with that curiosity or that question. So I think that would be one thing that I would just like encourage nonprofit leaders to do more of, which is to like ask more questions and be really sort of open to hearing surprising answers and things that might challenge you or might make you change your perspective on things.
I love that, like being curious. All great leaders, like that is the number one thing. They're ready to say like, oh, I don't know that. Let's find
Yeah.
out. Let's
Yeah.
discover, right? And they end up being the people who like know a ton of answers, but they're not great leaders because they know answers. They're great leaders because they're curious, and knowing a lot of answers is just the byproduct of a lifetime of like wanting to know more and being curious and ready to lead into the next thing that is unknown. I mean, so much of what I think makes nonprofit leadership unique is that many nonprofit leaders are leading into an unknown territory. They are pioneering, and the leadership that it takes to be a pioneer is different than the leadership that it takes to like make a widget over and over again consistently.
Absolutely.
It's forging into the unknown. It is a process of discovery the whole way. So, I just want everybody to like bask in that, curiosity advice. And, it's not that hard to be curious. And it's pretty fun, right?
Absolutely. Totally.
So for people who want to learn more, they want to support what you're doing, follow along, get more of your wisdom, who should be reaching out? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, great. Yes, we are always looking for, we are often hiring for different roles at Alight. We have opportunities for volunteers, particularly in Minneapolis and Nairobi. We're always looking for supporters and partners and donations and all the rest. Our website is wearealight.org. You can also follow us on social media. Our handles are We Are Alight. I'm Jocelyn Wyatt. You can follow me on LinkedIn. And definitely keep in touch. We have a great newsletter. We often host events, particularly at our hubs in Minneapolis and Nairobi, and would love to have people join our newsletter to find out about those as well. And please reach out anytime.
Amazing. We'll have all those links in the show notes. Jocelyn, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you out there for tuning in and everything you do to make our communities better. If you could do me a quick favor before you all sign off, if you can like and review this podcast, subscribe, whatever the buttons say, wherever you're listening to it, it helps boost the algorithm, and share this podcast with more folks who could benefit from this information. Until next time, I wish you all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.